drastic difference. That's why you've seen a drastic difference in this administration's policy with respect to the last. And it's one of the many reasons the American public reelected this president and support this Secretary of War in conducting these strikes.
So to clarify, Admiral Bradley was the one who gave that order for a second strike.
And he was well within his authority to do so.
And a separate question, the president several days ago said it was his intention to.
So that's why you've seen a drastic difference in this administration's policy with respect to the last. And it's one of the many reasons the American public reelected this president and support this Secretary of War in conducting these strikes.
So to clarify, Admiral Bradley was the one who gave that order for a second strike.
And he was well within his authority to do so.
And a separate question, the president several days ago said it was his intention to.
So that.
I hope you heard that. That was the press secretary, Karen. I want to get her last name correct. I believe it's Levitt. Levitt. Effectively making the point of saying, for the longest time, they kept saying that this wasn't necessarily authorized. It is clear at this point that this was authorized through presidential authority. Hegseth gave the order. The general effectively followed through with the order, and they murdered the fishermen. Now, again, I am blown away by this. I'm blown away by this on a few counts. All of this is illegal. There's no legal basis for any of this. And not just a legal basis for any of it. What they've decided to take issue with was not the fact that they murdered people on a boat or that they struck the boat in the first place. They are taking issue with the second strike. It's the double tap. It's like I blow up your car. There are people who are still alive hanging around outside, and I kill those people. And they say, hey, first strike was okay. The second strike is our issue. So if you murdered the people in the first strike, that would have been okay. All of this is very dodgy. And it is very wild the way the media is effectively treating this. And this goes also into the idea of Maduro, right? So Maduro has acknowledged that there was a conversation between Donald Trump and himself, that it was a pleasant conversation. But I frankly don't know what there's to talk about. Hey, that's a nice car you got there. And your wife is looking pretty sexy in that car. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to not murder you. I'm going to allow you to leave, and I'm going to take your wife and car. What are we talking about, right? Like, is that a conversation that you can really have? That you're going to steal my wife and my car? And this is supposed to be some negotiation around this notion of you stealing my wife and car, with the other side of that negotiation being murder. Or, in this case in Venezuela, mass murder, which is effectively what we're talking about. And the media treats this like, oh, well, Maduro's a bad guy. And so Maduro's a bad guy. This seems to be okay. Now, the American public, for the most part, seems to disagree with this. But despite the fact that the American public disagree with it, they disagree with it in an intellectual sense. It's kind of like Gaza. It's like, yeah, all things being equal, I don't necessarily like a genocide. We frown upon that. But I have to go to work. And I have to play my Xbox. And I have to do this other stuff. Meaning, it's disagreed with in an intellectual sense. And with the media's demonization of Venezuela that goes back for years at this point, and attempted overthrows of Venezuela that goes back decades, it seems that they have just kind of like oh well, Trump is building up a huge amount of arsenal in the Caribbean. Oh well, Trump has murdered 80 fishermen or 80 people in boats that we don't know who they are. Oh well. And then it's, hey, we don't like the fact that you murdered the people that were hanging off the side of the boat. If you murdered them in the first strike, that would have been okay. But the second strike, And then the argument that they use is, well, this was self-defense. It was self-defense. What? The U.S. military is in the Caribbean? And you have all of this hardware? And you're making the argument to me that this was self-defense, that you murdered people in a speedboat? Okay. And then when people were hanging off the side of the speedboat, that was also apparently self-defense? all of this is very strange. And all of this is in relation at this point to Venezuela. Now, kinetic attacks have not necessarily taken place on the landmass in and of itself, but the expectation is those attacks will take place at some point. It is hard to see how the United States effectively walks this back after putting this much military arsenal or hardware in that region, and then all of a sudden said, okay, well, we're not going to really do anything. We were just bluffing. Is it possible? I suppose so. Is it likely? Very skeptical, very skeptical. Also, Donald Trump made comments on Ukraine that I want to play. Yeah, we should talk about this also before Vanessa gets here. This is Trump when asked about, let's say, the conversation taken between Wickoff, Kushner, or Jared, as they called him, and Putin and Ushakov.
When I was in this office and I talked about no cards, I said, you have no cards. That was the time to settle. I thought that would have been a much better time to settle. But they, in their wisdom, decided not to do that. They have a lot of things against them right now. But you have President Putin had a very good meeting yesterday with Jared Kushner and with Steve Witkoff. What comes out of that meeting, I can't tell you, because it does take two to tango. Ukraine, I think we have something pretty well worked out with them. They're very satisfied considering. But the sad part is if I were president, no war would have ever happened. They would have had 100% of their territory. Nothing would have happened. It's a very sad situation. So think of this. When I was
It is a very sad situation. Now, whether the war would have taken place if Trump was in office or not, who knows? I have no idea at this point, right? What we can say is this is obviously Donald Trump's war. What seems to be clear is that the Russian side is not budging an inch in regards to their core demands and the things that they find to be necessary in regards to negotiations. Will they show flexibility? Perhaps. What that flexibility will be on? Who knows? The reality of it is losers don't get to dictate terms. And the United States, in this case, is the loser. It seems that Donald Trump is recognizing, hey, the situation on the ground has gotten dire. The situation has gotten fundamentally worse. And yeah, we've had a pleasant conversation with Ushakov and Putin, but nothing necessarily has come out yet. And what's wild about this is the Ukrainian side. The U.S. cannot even get its proxy to say yes to what the U.S. is putting out. What the U.S. is putting out is a dead letter already, and they can't even get their proxy to agree with the dead letter. Nevertheless, negotiations will, quote unquote, continue. Putin has made that point on more than one occasion, effectively pointing out, hey, the terms of special military operation are going fantastically well. Putin seems to be very confident. And if you look at what's taking place on the ground, meaning Volchansk and Pokrovsk, both of those have effectively fallen or liberated, depending upon your point of view. The push, the incentive for the Russians to make any kind of deal that doesn't deal with the core reasons for this war, that doesn't deal with the sanctions, that doesn't deal with their demands, evaporates. Now, I had a conversation with John Helmer yesterday, but it's going up immediately after the show. And Helmer gave an astonishingly good breakdown of what the comments by Ushakov means at the end of it, where the Russians have come out and effectively said, look, some of these provisions are okay. Many of the others are not. And even Putin in his own speech or his own commentary, effectively going after the Europeans, effectively saying, look, if they want to start a war, then we are prepared. And this is not going to be the same war that we're waging on Ukraine. Making a distinction between a special military operation where we are being very precise in what we're going after versus an actual war where Europe will have to effectively suffer the consequences of their decisions and their actions in this case. So there is that. France seems to be deciding that they want to put in military contractors into Ukraine. Now, again, you would have to explain to the families of these people why these people are going to die, because these people will die. I don't know why he thinks that because they're French, that they're somehow going to get a pass on death. They are not. It is impossible for them not to. If you put troops of any particular country into Ukraine, and the Russian government allows those people to exist unmolested, and by molested, I mean death, then what does it mean for another country to say, hey, we'll put our troops into Ukraine? Meaning, if you don't kill the Europeans that are dumb enough to enter the Ukrainian conflict, then you allow other Europeans to believe that they can also put their troops in. So what starts off as 10,000 or 5,000 ends up being 10, 15, 20,000 European troops, which, let's be straightforward about this, was the premise and rationale for the war in the first place. So those events are effectively taking place around the world. One of the other interesting things, apparently there was a meeting between, well, piggyback onto that. Modi is meeting with Vladimir Putin. That meeting is supposed to take place 45 minutes, give or take. And I guess we're going to get a readout of that particular meeting. Helmer gave a great breakdown of that also in regards to what India wants from the Russians in this case. And the question that Peskov was asked and did not answer all that well in regards to whether or not, let's say, Russia will show deference to China if indeed there's a conflict between India and China. Now, I suppose the difficulty in answering that question is you have a relationship with both, and in having a relationship with both, you don't necessarily want to air one side or the other, which created, let's say, difficulties for Peskov to engage that question in a direct sense of a flat yes or a flat no, in which case Peskov effectively dithered. I think part of the issue and part of the difficulty that Peskov had in that, answering that, was, is there really an expectation that China and India are going to go to war? And so maybe it just wasn't something that he was thinking about. However, it clearly was on the minds of the Indians. The question becomes, what is this meeting about Putin and Modi about? And I guess we're going to get to see the readout of it later today, probably before the show even ends. But I see a good friend of the show in the background. Let me bring her in. Come on. Why can't I add you to the stage? There you are. Vanessa Beeley. There's that smile. How are you doing? You doing okay today?
Yeah, I'm doing fine, thank you. With all the craziness that's going on everywhere in the world, it's kind of difficult to keep up with it, to be honest.
Yeah, it is. And this show does its damnedest to do so.
Yeah.
Moving all around the
Yes,
world.
you do a very good job, but it's almost mind-boggling.
I do my best. Sometimes it's not enough. But thank you for joining me. And just for the audience to know, Vanessa Beeley, she is an investigative journalist. Investigative journalist. She's international investigative journalist. You can follow her work. By the way, I just want to make sure this is correct. Where can people find your work?
The best place is probably Substack, because that's Vanessa Beeley or Beeley Substack, I think. Because I just republish everything there. But I mean, I'm on YouTube, Telegram, X, heavily shadow banned and censored, of course.
Yeah, but you're still kicking. You're still doing the work.
Yeah,
so.
no, I'm still there.
Yeah.
Hanging on.
You sent me a troubling, I guess not necessarily an article, but we were talking about this yesterday, where you were talking about a cauldron that has been created around Hezbollah. And you even sent me the map for this. Let me see if I can show this map. All right, let me see if I can show this so the audience can see it for themselves, because they may say, what do you mean by cauldron in this case?
What are you talking about?
Yeah, and I'm going to let you break this down. Okay, here we are. Good. Damn it. All right, hold on. Let me try one more time.
It's not working. We can talk it through. I mean, it's
we can talk it through, but I'm going to
complicated, but it would be good at the end to be for people to be able to visualize it, because it is, even if I'm talking it through, it's very difficult for people to figure out the borders that I'm discussing.
I am going to show this map, hell or high water. But
I should have come with it on a piece of paper, and then we just...
No, you're perfectly fine. You're perfectly fine. All right, so okay, all right, I got it.
Yeah.
All right,
so
I'm going to let you explain it as I show it.
Okay, fine.
But go ahead, break this down for us. When you say cauldron, what do
Mm.
you mean by cauldron, or what do you mean by
Well,
Hezbollah around it?
look, if you go back in history to whether it is the clean break doctrine that was, of course, penned effectively by the CIA, commissioned by Benjamin Netanyahu, who was then part of the Zionist government. This is the actual map of the new Middle East. Have you got the other one that shows all the new walls that are being put up around Syria?
Yes.
And then, of course, there were other versions of the clean break doctrine. There's the Yinon plan, the map of Greater Israel that everyone will be aware of. This is a map that was created by Colonel Ralph Peters, who basically rewrote the blood borders, as he called it. So he rewrote how the Middle East should look. So this is basically, and people might be looking at this going, but I don't understand. But effectively, the red barbed wire that you see there, apart from the one that traverses Syria to the south of Damascus, that hasn't yet been built. But in my opinion, it's in the process of being created. Those walls and those security fences are effectively already in place. So if you look at the northern border of Syria, the border with Turkey, which is 825 kilometers, more or less, Turkey has, in fact, built a separation wall across that entire border. When I was in Syria in 2018 and I was visiting the northeast after the liberation of various towns and cities there by the Syrian Arab Army, I could actually film the Turks building the annexation wall, or the apartheid wall, if you like, inside Syrian territory. So they've not only built the wall, they've effectively annexed Syrian territory as well. It's the third longest wall in the world after the Great Wall of China and the US-Mexico border wall. It's, I think, 3 meters high, 2 meters wide, 7-ton concrete blocks. It has a military patrol access area either side of the wall, which is patrolled by Turkish military, but EU-sponsored armored vehicles. It has seismic and acoustic scanners. It has jammers. It has drone detection facilities. It has gun towers and watchtowers, around 120 along the whole length. And then if we come to the eastern border of Syria, so if we go down alongside the northeastern border, which is with Iraq, which is around, around 600 kilometers. They've basically built already 400 kilometers worth of similar surveillance style wall, similar to what you'll see on the US-Mexico border. Then you come down to, so they're completing that wall. So that wall will effectively close in Syria from the eastern border with Iraq. But then you come down to the Jordan border, and this is where actually it gets kind of more interesting in a way. The Jordan border project began back in 2008. So it began under George W. Bush. It was picked up by Obama. Obama put in something like $500 million into the surveillance structure on the border with Syria, and also the drop-down border with Iraq, which you can see where Al-Tanif is written there. The border between Jordan and Iraq is also being basically turned into a surveillance border wall or fence. Now, allegedly, this began to prevent weapons of mass destruction exiting these countries. Of course, we don't need to get into the nonsense that weapons of mass destruction is, because that was the justification for the war against Iraq. But that was originally the justification for building particularly the Jordan security wall, right? Or fence. I would call the Jordan structure more of a fence. But again, it has something like surveillance detection, 5-mile radius either side of the fence. All of the surveillance from the Jordan side, by the way, is fed into the central CENTCOM, so into US command in Jordan itself. And so it under Obama, he poured in $500 million. Then it went into Biden. In 2024, Biden put in something like nearly 400 million, of which 150 million would go to Jordan for continued surveillance structure building between Syria and Jordan. This is all under the, the Homeland Security sector, by the way. So effectively, American taxpayers' money is going into building this surveillance structure on the borders between Jordan and Syria and Jordan and Iraq. But then if you look, so if you continue around the Jordan border, and you'll see there in Lebanon, of course, Hezbollah is centered very much in the south of Lebanon. And at the moment, you have Israel building security structures inside Lebanese territory. So you'll see at the south there, it's effectively being closed in. Immediately after the fall of Damascus in December, we're coming up to the 1 year, I don't want to call it anniversary, remembrance of the fall of Syria. Mm-hmm. Israel took over the smaller circle up the kind of southeastern side or border of Lebanon called Mount Hermon, which is the highest point in the region, very strategic point. And so effectively what's happening is that a wall is being built around southern Lebanon. This is also being contributed to by the UK, by the way, who for years now have been supplying watchtowers that they used in Northern Ireland. They're decommissioning them in Northern Ireland and bringing them to Lebanon, and they've been placing them alongside the Lebanese border with Syria. So that's why I've shown that it's pretty much enclosed through surveillance structure put in by the Zionist bloc, so by the Israelis, the US, and the British, to enclose Lebanon, but particularly to enclose southern Lebanon, because Israel, as I said, are erecting border walls inside Lebanese territory. There's multiple videos on X that you can see of this happening in different areas in the south. But also what these walls are doing, not only are they completely enclosing Syria effectively, which is now, of course, under the control of Al-Qaeda and ISIS and all of these atrocity committing terrorist groups. But if you look where the only real opening is to the Mediterranean side on the Syrian coast. But then, of course, right now, Israel is extending its reach hugely into Cyprus and effectively buying up property there. It's linking itself to the Greek Cypriot government. It's threatening Turkey to some degree in the north, although Turkey shouldn't really be there in the first place. But effectively, Israel is extending its reach. And of course, historically, Cyprus was a target for the state of Israel, and it was used largely as a sort of refugee shipping point to Palestine. So it's always been in the crosshairs of the Zionist entity anyway, of the Zionist movement. But if you also look, so there's a line beneath Damascus, which is going from Mount Hermon, which, as I said, is under the control of the Israelis. The Americans now are talking about bringing in military and surveillance equipment to the south of Damascus. And of course, there's the existing American unlawful base at Al Tanf on the triangle between Jordan and Iraq. So in my opinion, they're not necessarily going to build a wall or put a fence, but that's going to be the cross-off line where it becomes Israeli occupied territory. I mean, if we imagine Israel since December last year have effectively taken over, I think it's 800 square kilometers of Syrian territory. They're now around 40 to 20 kilometers from Damascus itself. They've built 19 new bases. They've got tanks moving freely around, particularly in the southwestern area close to the occupied Golan territory. So in my opinion, what we're kind of seeing, and it does relate to the clean break doctrine, which is all about breaking the Middle East down into manageable sectarian states that will be reliant upon Israeli protection. So in other words, Israel will have economic control of the Middle East, either directly or through its Gulf state proxies, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, that were effectively created by the British to enable the existence of the Zionist entity in the region. And of course, the placing of Israel in Palestine was designed to break up any potential pan-Arabism. At the time, you had the United Arab Republic, which of course was Egypt and Syria. And if you look at the placing of Israel, it was put directly to break down any kind of unity between Arab states. I hope that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. Wow. Okay. And so what we're looking at here around Lebanon is effectively a chain of military bases and, let's say,
not bases.
installation.
They're kind of, installations, watchtowers. So from the north around the eastern border with Syria, which at the moment is also under threat from Jolani's foreign Takfiri forces and ISIS forces, right? In the south, Israel is actually building solid apartheid walls, very similar to the ones that they're now increasing in the West Bank. I think there was a report yesterday that they're planning to build a new apartheid wall in Hebron, separating Palestinian communities again and preventing Palestinian farmers from reaching their land. So that'll be in Hebron, about 12 kilometers in from the border with the Jordan Valley. So effectively, walls are going up everywhere, which ties in with the idea of the new Middle East or of the new blood borders, the encircling of resistant states and resistant actors in the region. So if you look at Syria and how it's now being encircled by these security barriers, what it's also doing is preventing any access to Syria or to Lebanon from Iran and Iraq, and the other way around. So any resistance factions inside Syria, for example, can't go to the help of Iraq if anything kicks off in Iraq. Iraqi resistance factions can't reach either Lebanon, Jordan, or Syria because of the surveillance structures that have been put in place on the Jordan-Iraqi border. So this is all about encircling the resistant states and the resistance actors, and also, more importantly, isolating Iran.
Wow. What has been the response from these states? I mean, this is including Iraq. Obviously, Jolani has done everything in his power to make relationships with Israel in this case. But you would think that Lebanon, Iraq, these countries will take great issue with this. Even Turkey looks like they would take issue. I know Turkey built their own wall. But give us a breakdown of the players that are involved in their takes on this.
Yeah, I mean, you've also got to remember from the Iraqi perspective, even from the resistance perspective, the threat from Syria is of Jolani releasing the ISIS Takfiri elements into Iraq to attack the resistance there. So to some degree, it's useful to the Iraqi resistance to have a barrier to prevent that happening, right? From a Turkish perspective, it was always about annexing northern territory in Syria to act as a buffer zone against what they perceived to be the Kurdish terrorist threat, but also simply to annex Syrian territory to take control of the industrial capital of Aleppo, which was their goal even from 2012, the first city that was invaded in the eastern sectors and in the countryside were by the Al-Tawid brigades, which were Turkish-backed brigades that took control of all the industrial areas in Aleppo, stripped them bare, and took all the equipment and machinery into Turkey, which was then either sold off as scrap metal or it was reestablished as functioning factories and so on. Industrial facilities in Turkey itself. And also, of course, Turkey initially was responsible for siphoning the oil out of northeast Syria through ISIS and then reselling it to Israel. So for Turkey, it's kind of a win-win. But also another interesting point for Turkey is we know that Turkey and Israel are to some degree, or were to some degree, allies in bringing about the fall of Syria. But since the fall of Syria, Turkey has been attempting to get deeper inside Syria and establish air defense and military installations on behalf of Jolani. But every time it attempts to get anywhere near the center of Syria, it's been bombed by Israel.
Mhm.
And ultimately, Israel is not going to allow any regional military to remain that could potentially be a threat to Israel in the future. And that includes Egypt, it includes Jordan, it even includes the Gulf states eventually. That's why also the US is while it's making noises about sort of defense contracts with Saudi Arabia, you'll note that Trump is actually providing some equipment, but it's of a lower spec than what is being provided to Israel, right?
Yeah.
But I think at some point, Turkey understands that it may be under threat. So in my opinion, this is just my analysis of it. I think they're also building the wall to protect themselves in the future, both from a potential backlash from the Takfiris that are not happy with Jolani's Western pivot or Israeli security agreements that at the moment appear to be on the rocks, but I think eventually are going to happen. Right. Israel is not going to withdraw. Israel never withdraws from territory that it's occupied, neither does the US. And it's very clear that Israel is going to take control of the South, not directly through its own settlement programs, but using the Druze, using local actors to try and maintain a foothold in the South to enable it to extend up the eastern corridor into the northeastern Kurdish held area of Syria and then extend into Iraq. So those are those two. For Jordan, Jordan is a vassal state of the British and the US. I mean, you know, Middle Eastern CENTCOM operations are run out of Jordan. So for Jordan, it's also of benefit to the extent that if there is any backlash from either resistance factions that are in existence still inside Syria, we'll come on to that, or from Takfiri or Muslim Brotherhood elements, because there are large numbers of Muslim Brotherhood factions also inside Jordan. So Jordan knows that there is a very high potential for internal destabilization if it doesn't play ball with Israel and the US and the UK, right? For Lebanon, of course, Hezbollah are not happy about it. But to a large degree, until a new escalation happens, they are adhering to the ceasefire, yeah. But in the eastern border sections, which are effectively under the control of the Lebanese armed forces, we have to remember that the LAF is actually sponsored by the United States. Right. And so therefore, for them, it is to some degree also of benefit to have the watchtowers because there is a genuine threat from ISIS elements on the border. So it's kind of mixed, if you know what I mean. But ultimately, it's not conducive to freely moving resistance actors or free peoples in any of these countries, or of the transfer of weapons and equipment and technology and advisors. Because with the fall of Syria, of course, the backbone of that land bridge was very much broken. But now what's happening is that we're seeing the physical and military encirclement of these countries, and economic encirclement also, because of course Lebanon is under huge economic pressure.
Explain
all the
this
countries
map
are
for
under economic. Yeah.
This is the second map that you gave, and you said
Yeah.
unofficial.
So
Colonel
yeah.
Peter.
What I wanted to show, because a lot of people always refer to the Greater Israel map or the Oda Yinon plan or the clean break doctrine, but actually they all kind of, and the Ralph Peters map, this was created in 2006. He's a former US military guy He's still writing books about this. He's written a recent article about what happened on October the 7th, and he's very clearly pro-Israel, anti-resistance. And so here, what I wanted to show, because for me, none of these plans remain static. Like, all of them are going to be changing as the geopolitical situation changes in the region. But they give an indication of what is going to happen. So what is this? It's a redrawing of the borders that really were created by the British and the Europeans back in the early 20th century under Sykes-Picot, for example, which carved up the region already. But this is effectively carving up the region again. But again, if you look at Syria, and you've got the creation of a Kurdistan state, of course, the Kurds are being backed in Syria by the Pentagon until well into 2026. And then you've got Iraq territory, Syrian territory being carved into, Turkish territory being carved into, which will be anathema to Turkey and to Erdogan, to create this Kurdistan state, right? But then if you look at Iraq, what he was intending was to create a Sunni Iraq on the border with Syria. So again, it's another barrier to Iran and to the Iraqi Shia state, which he's suggesting should be on the border with Iran, but separated from Syria and Lebanon, and of course Palestine. We shouldn't forget that any break in the supply chain or the manufacturing chain is also going to impact heavily on Palestine and the Palestinian resistance. So the reason I wanted to show this is because I think what we're looking at is a reframing of the region, a remodeling of the region for the benefit of Israel. It's not necessarily going to follow any of these mappings, because they were all created, half a century ago, or no, but 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And so I think you're going to see a combination of all of those, but ultimately a breaking down of the Middle East. Ideally, this is their strategy. I'm not saying that the resistance is not going to try and do everything they can to prevent it. And we saw something recently in southern Syria in a village or a town called Beit Jin, which is right in that area, the southwestern area, where Israel actually carried out a fairly major incursion against a group called Jamaah Islamiyah, which Israel claims has links to Hezbollah and has links to Hamas. They killed, I think, around 13 people in the incursion, but they lost a Humvee armored vehicle. They had to bomb it themselves from the air so as not to leave it behind. But what this suggests is that there are still resistance factions. Since that attack, they've been surveilling the area on a daily basis. Most of the civilians have had to leave because it's clearly a hot area now. But what it's very clear, or what it shows very clearly, there are still resistance factions, particularly in this southern region, that was always against both the annexation of the Golan territories and any incursion by Israel into Syrian territory. So this isn't, to a degree, the more that America and Israel clearly occupy the south of Syria, the more it leaves itself open to attack, both by Syrian resistance factions that will either emerge or are already in the area waiting for there to be kind of a movement against the Israeli incursions, right? So to a degree, it sounds weird. The further they go, the better it is for the resistance, because then it's clear that there is a threat. And this is Syrian territory. It's not Israeli territory. It's not American territory. This is Syrian territory. So therefore, it can be defended lawfully against an occupying force.
You made the point of saying Syria is being turned into Gaza. What do you mean? Explain that for us.
I think if you look at what we're seeing in Gaza, we know that Gaza is a effectively a concentration camp and an extermination camp. And it's even more so now, because since the UN Security Council Resolution 2803 was passed, of course, with Russia and China's abstention, what have we seen? We've seen a dialing down of the actual hardcore genocide, but it's still ongoing because there's no humanitarian aid coming in, there's no food coming in. Israel now occupies 58% of Gazan territory. And by the way, it's the territory that is the most abundant from an agricultural perspective. So they've pushed 2 million Gazans from a landmass that was around 40 kilometers by 12 kilometers into a landmass that is on the coast, is desert, is obliterated, is pulverized by 2 years of Zionist bombing. And it's completely surrounded. They can't get out, right? So how I see what they're doing to Syria now, but on a much larger scale, is to create an environment where Syrians are actually corralled inside the territory. They can't easily leave a territory that is overrun by Takfiri elements. And by the way, Israel is creating the same environment inside Gaza because it's using terrorist proxies, ISIS-style proxies in Gaza to attack the Gazan people and to attack Hamas positions, right? And that's effectively what's happening inside Syria. So at that point, what information is coming out of Syria as regards the atrocities that are being committed? Very little, because mainstream media is not reporting on it. The same as in Gaza, right? I mean, Israel was not allowing journalists into Gaza, so they were reliant upon the Gazan stringers who were then being assassinated. What is it? More than 200, almost 300 journalists killed by Israel. But Syria effectively will be enclosed. Meanwhile, Jolani and the ISIS factions and Al-Qaeda, totally supported by the West, who've now lifted sanctions, taken them off the proscribed terrorist list, will be committing atrocities with very little reporting on those atrocities, because people in Syria are terrified. Even for me now, I've lost a number of sources, not because they've been killed, thank God, but because they've gone into hiding. And so, you know, the information coming out is going to be extremely limited, both as regards the atrocities being committed by Jolani and the Takfiris, but also the atrocities or the land grab, resource grab by Western actors and other major powers, even like Russia, inside Syria, that we're not going to be aware of. I mean, the reason that Israel is trying to take the south is not only as a land grab, but it's also to get their hands on resources like the water resources, because the main Syrian water resources are in the south. The Golan, occupied Golan, already provides 30% of Israel's water supply. Wow. So Israel is looking not only for land, economic expansion, but also control of resources.
And just to be clear, the atrocities continue. I mean, they've been murdering people of various religious communities, stealing houses, those type of things. Can the people of Syria easily leave? I mean, especially with these barricades and everything else that are being put up and erected.
No. I mean, it's almost impossible. Yeah, it's almost impossible. I mean, even people trying to... There are smuggling routes, but they're extremely dangerous. And the Takfiris know where all the kind of smuggling crossings are. And at one point, when they were back in March, when they were massacring on industrial scale, the Alawites in the coastal areas, and they were trying to cross into northern Lebanon. In the end, they pretty much had to stop because the Takfiri forces had gone to those crossing points and were killing them as they were trying to reach them. But it's also neighboring countries are not that keen on Syrians coming in. Lebanon, perfect example. You know, they already have, I don't know how many million refugees from Syria, of course, from during the regime change war from 2011. And so the restrictions on Syrians is also, and don't forget that the EU, which was perfectly happy to bring in Syrian refugees during the regime change war, but as soon as Damascus fell and Syrians were really at risk of ethnic cleansing and atrocities by the Al-Qaeda affiliates, stopped all Syrians coming to European countries completely.
Well, I remember there is this clip of a Syrian from Germany that agreed with the fall of Syria, effectively agreed with the overthrow. And the journalist was effectively asking him, saying, well, shouldn't you be ready to go back now? And he was like, what do you mean go back? And effectively the German government was evicting him. Yeah, he doesn't want to. It's like, so you agreed with this overthrow. You wanted Jelani in office, in power. And now that Jelani's in power,
you don't want to go back.
You don't want to go back. And he's like, oh, it's outrageous that they're forcing me to go back. It's like, how, it's like, how is that? How does that work? Right. One of the other things you pointed out was, and I saw this myself, but I didn't get the entire significance of it. The Supreme Leader gave a speech, and it was kind of out of the blue. Now, I've seen reporting that Israel is still looking for these kind of extended attacks on Iran, which seems suicidal, but I can't necessarily put it past them for doing so. I thought the first war was suicidal. What do you make of the Supreme Leader coming out giving a speech in this way?
I think you have to interpret that as being imminent threat. I mean, you know, everyone in the region is kind of bracing themselves leading up to Christmas, because I think there was, I lose track of all the insane psychotic statements put out by Zionist officials and you know, commentators on social media. But there was someone who put out some kind of, I think it might have been a post on X saying, you know, we're going to be having Hanukkah in Lebanon, south of the Litani River this year. So, of course, that's what, the 14th or 15th of December, I think. And then there's been other chatter about after Netanyahu's visit to Trump, which I think is supposed to happen on or around Christmas or early New Year, that the war will escalate at that point. Speaking to people here, tensions are extremely high, not helped, of course, by the meeting between Nawaf Salam and the committee that is very much aligned with Israel and Washington and Saudi Arabia and the UK, the whole Zionist bloc, in Nakura, in southern Lebanon. Yes, no, yesterday.
Yesterday, okay.
You know, and to some degree, a lot of people saw that as a first step towards normalization, because Lebanon has never directly negotiated with the Zionist entity. There were protests last night, and there's been mixed responses. Of course, Hezbollah's, I don't know if they've put out an official statement yet, but there were protests last night about the meeting. And it's perceived, of course, that Nawaf Salam is throwing the resistance and the people of the south under the bus. So, you know, Lebanese sovereignty also goes out of the window, because the point is, and I think it was President Assad in his speech at the Arab League summit, just as October the 7th had happened, when he said, look, if you try to compromise with Israel, what happens? It just bites your hand off, and then it bites your arm off. And I mean, he didn't say that. I'm paraphrasing what he said. But he said, basically, there's no compromise with Israel. And everybody in the resistance knows this, right? There's zero. Look at all the peace processes with Palestine from 1947 onwards. When has Israel ever honored any part of the deal, or when it's acted unlawfully as it did in 1967 and it annexed territories back then? It's never going to renege on those territories. It's never going to leave them. It's never going to leave the Golan territories. right?
Yeah.
And so, to a degree, tensions are high, and there is a risk of escalation. There's also the potential that it will maintain at this sort of high tension state until something happens where the resistance has no option but to react. So
Well,
we're kind
apparently,
of on a knife edge.
well, apparently in the meeting, they made the point of saying, well, look, you need to pull out before we can disarm Hezbollah. The
Yeah,
disarming of Hezbollah is not happening. I don't,
it's
it
not
would,
going
it
to
would
happen.
blow my mind.
It's not going to happen. You know, it's like the disarming of Hamas is never going to happen. I mean, yesterday in Rafah, there was an incredible operation by Hamas, who've been holed up underground for days because Israel wanted to kill them by blocking the tunnels, completely depriving them of oxygen or food, water, anything. And what happened? They exited from the tunnels and ambushed Zionist forces. And of course, then what does Israel do? It bombs Khan Yunis last night and bombs civilians. It doesn't bomb a military zone. It bombs civilians, of course, and kills women and children and starving civilians again. But this kind of heroism from the resistance it just doesn't go away, you know, and Hamas, and it's not about Hamas or Hezbollah, it's about the people as well in the south. I mean, how many interviews have we seen with elderly ladies, God bless them, in the south of Lebanon saying, I'm not going to allow Hezbollah to give away their weapons. I will take the weapons and use them against Israel.
Yeah, I would imagine they know. But how does this, what is the relationship currently between Hezbollah and the government of Lebanon at this point?
Tense, I would say. I mean, I do have to say that living here, Hezbollah is always the one that is trying to maintain sovereignty, trying to remain unified, trying not to put the country in a situation where the other communities and political factions are at risk. And so Hezbollah is forever walking this political tightrope because it's not a state actor, it's a non-state actor. So it has to act under the auspices of the state. And it always does so very responsibly, very often, of course, with the sacrifice of its own people in so doing. So, yeah, I mean, we don't know, but certainly preparations are being made for escalation and for aggression. And that, to me, is what was clear from the speech given by the Supreme Leader. And the fact that it was sort of, it wasn't spoken about beforehand. I think people only knew it was going to happen 30 minutes before he spoke. And so it was clearly a kind of a warning and giving instructions to people also to prepare.
Even people of
and
Iran,
they must be getting intelligence. Yeah.
And you're saying they may be getting intelligence, effectively saying that something is about to come about, something is about to spark off.
Yeah, I mean, they must be getting some degree of intelligence, and they must know what is happening regionally. You know, we had Pete Hegseth how many months ago? Oh, no, it wasn't even months, was it? 6 weeks ago, basically telling the Iraqi defense minister, make sure that the resistance factions in Iraq don't respond when we start a war in the region, right? So the messaging has been out there for a long time now. But we've also seen reports of air defense being moved around Iran to points that were badly hit in the 12-day war, for example. So they're clearly, maneuvering and preparing for the next round.
What is the goal of this? I mean, it seems, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, in the first 12-day war, or the 12-day war, not the first 12-day war, but in the 12-day war, Israel took the beating of its life And yeah, they were able to kill a lot of people. But again, killing a lot of people is not necessarily the ultimate goal of war. Usually you have objectives. And it seems that the goal of it was this kind of decapitation strike to remove the leadership of Iran. That failed. And Israel burned through a lot of the resources, like human capital that they were using, basically assets that were on the ground. In the process of that, Iran has expelled ungodly numbers of people out of the country, not to mention the executions of people who they found that were effectively working with Israel in pursuit of their objectives on this. So many of the assets that they effectively had at their disposal have been expended. So they took their shot. They failed at their shot. And they burned through a lot of assets in doing so, not to mention the air defense that seemingly Iran went through like butter and destroyed many of those assets, which it's clear at this point that the United States doesn't have a huge amount to even give in the first place. So what is the objective of this? I mean, it seems like they're just running into a buzzsaw.
Yeah, and to some degree, I think the 12-day war was also a probing exercise by the US and by Israel to see, to a degree, what would happen. Of course, they took a beating. I'm not saying that they didn't. And the US prior to that took a beating, even from Yemen, if you remember, where the Pentagon was saying, no, please stop this war because we're going to run out of weapons to actually attack China. What are you doing? You guys should stop.
It's like, so if you need to attack Israel, that's fine. But leave us out of it. Yeah.
So, you know, I think it's very difficult to tell. Will they try to assassinate the supreme leader? Yes, of course. You know, this is their tactic. I mean, they've just assassinated a senior commander in Hezbollah in the last couple of weeks here in a bombing in the suburbs of southern Beirut in Dahieh, which also, again, included the targeting, of course, of civilians in a residential area, a busy residential area. I guess in the end, what they really want to do, and if you look at how they're remodeling the whole of the West Asia region and isolating Iran, they want to contain Iran. If they can't defeat Iran militarily, they would also ideally like regime change in Iran towards a regime that would pivot towards normalization with Israel and the West. To some degree, the reformist government in Iran is not necessarily the strongest reference resistance ideology. There is a degree of division in Iran, right?
Yeah.
But what happened during the 12-day war is that you saw a huge unification of the Iranian people against an external threat. What they might try to do, and I'm not going to get onto the nuclear option because that's just too terrifying, but of course it exists and it's very rarely spoken about from a Zionist perspective. They have the Samson doctrine. If they feel that existentially the state of Israel is under threat, they have declared that they will use nuclear weapons, even against allies if it's necessary. So that is one high risk element in this. But another one, which I think they might try and go for initially, is to contain Iran and to create a situation in which the people turn against the state. Exactly what they did in Syria over 14 years, but particularly in the last 5 years when Trump brought in the economic sanctions that in the end did cripple Syria, reduce reliance upon a central government into kind of corrupt mafia cartels that were running the economy behind the scenes and benefiting from it. They may try to create that kind of scenario. I mean, I'm slightly suspicious about the kind of sudden drought in Iran. I'm not going to get into kind of geoenginering, but I do wonder if it's not
like
somehow being read. Yeah,
the heart device.
Yeah, because this is a major. I don't know even if it's heart, but it just strikes me because the regime change war against Syria actually was kicked off with a drought in 2009. That, in my opinion, from what I've looked at on the ground, was created by Turkey. because Turkey has control of the water sources from Turkey into Syria and Iraq, and it can turn those dams off at any point and lower the level of the Euphrates, for example, which it has done on numerous occasions during the regime change war. And so, in my opinion, the drought in Syria, which led to the regime change war in 2011, was created by the alliance that wanted to overthrow the Syrian government. So there's a lot of things going on now that I think are all part of the war against Iran, right? And so I'm not necessarily expecting like a massive aggression, because we kind of know how that's going to end. I see it more as an intensification of a war of attrition, but I could be wrong. I could be wrong.
Basically, isolate Iran, because you can't necessarily take them down militarily, and
Yeah.
create these kind of Abraham Accords where you economically isolate Iran. I mean,
Well,
do you
they've
foresee
done
that
this
work-
in South America. They've done this in Latin America. You've got the Isaac Accords. You've got Milei signing on to them. You've got Honduras now under the control of a Trump puppet. Venezuela is very much being isolated because it's another link in the resistance chain, right? And I think it was Backbeat Media that brought up the point that if Iran at some point closes down the Hormuz Straits, so that closes down the oil transit route, right, for the United States and for the whole region, then they need Venezuelan oil. So that's also why Venezuela is suddenly so important to the Trump administration.
Do you think Turkey and Israel, at this point, considering that they're rubbing borders, are going to end up in some kind of major conflict?
I think it's extremely unlikely, because Turkey is a NATO member state. And after Israel bombed the attempts by Turkey to encroach further onto Syrian territory, they had these negotiations and kind of a deconfliction agreement. However, of course, Turkey still, they still have an exchange of surveillance information and intelligence information. But at some point, yes, I do think there is going to be a degree of confrontation between particularly Erdogan and Israel. I mean, you're seeing it in Cyprus to a degree, because with Israel's encroachment or infiltration of Cyprus, of course, it does put at risk Turkey's occupation of the north. So, yeah, I do think, you know, between all of these so-called allies, you're going to see some degree of competing interests and how they manage it. But I don't think it's going to come to direct conflict between Turkey and Israel. I think that would be a bit crazy, because Turkey has a huge army, which has been, of course, supplied by the United States and the EU. And it's not a kind of, it's not like Egypt. It's a pretty well-equipped, well-trained army, as far as I know, from having seen them, you know, invade Syria on a number of occasions.
Vanessa, this has been a fantastic breakdown. Thank you for the maps. I am glad that we were able to show the audience so they can get an idea, like a visual idea of what is taking place. Yeah, everyone that I've talked to has this expectation that something is going to spark a larger conflict in the Middle East, and people have been on pins and needles about it. So thank you for this breakdown, honestly. Before I close, do you want to have any closing comments on this? Anything that we didn't hit? Anything that you want the audience to know before we close?
No, I think I've probably kind of confused people enough.
No, your breakdown was excellent. No, it's looking at the map, you can kind of get a sense of this idea of the cauldrons that are being created, and especially in this idea of the way that Syria is being carved. No, you did a great job. No, you did a great job.
Good.
Vanessa Beeley, international investigative journalist. You can find her on Twitter at Vanessa Beeley. You can read her Substack at vanessabeeley.substack. Definitely check her out. She gives these breakdowns. And as you point out, everything that you do ends up on your Substack. So thank you for this.
Yep.
I really appreciate it.
No, you're welcome, Jamal. Thanks for having me on again. Take care.
Absolutely. Be safe. Have a good one. All right. Shout out to Vanessa. Great breakdown. I'm going to go from one good guest to another good guest. We're joined with Arnaud Develay. How you doing, Arnaud? You doing okay today?
I'm doing fine, Jamal. I just was tuning in with my headphones, and they were giving me a little trouble, but we're all set now.
Oh,
How are you?
excellent. Excellent. I'm doing okay. I'm not doing too bad today. Arnaud Develay. He's author, political analyst, international lawyer specializing in international criminal law. His book, Foreign Entanglements, Biden, Ukraine, and the Fracturing of America's Political Consensus. So we had a lot of big news that was taking place in Moscow. You had Jared, as Russia called him, Jared, meeting with Mr. Witkoff. You had Wang Yi meeting with Lavrov. You had Modi and Putin meeting today, in fact. What do you make
And Macron.
of this?
Macron
Right.
meeting with Wang Yi, yeah, as well. Yes.
Oh, Macron is meeting with Wang Yi. Okay, wow, I didn't
Yeah.
realize. Okay, that I didn't know.
Macron is in China right now as we speak. Yes.
Is he? Wow.
Trying to
It's
remain
amazing how
relevant.
somebody-
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking the same thing. It's amazing how somebody so irrelevant is making moves like this. There has been a report out that France is trying to put, I guess you could say, paramilitary, or let's say groups somewhat aligned with the French government and military into Ukraine. Do you see this happening, or is this a cry for relevance from France?
Well, if we go by some of the statements that have been released by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on the basis of reports compiled by the Foreign Service of Russia, the chit-chatting, as they say, tends to indicate that France is itching to send some troops, not just some PMCs. Could be, well, they may be labeled like that, but we may actually have maybe foreign legions, and foreign legions are pretty much official French troops as it comes. They do parade on the 14th of July, as much as any other army corps. So yeah, this has been floating. It's not a surprise. Going back to the omnibus law of August 2023 for the 2024-2030 window, there seemed to be a drive to get France ready for a some would say peer-to-peer, some would say high-intensity conflict. Suffice it to say that regional medical facilities throughout France, but not only, as well as in Germany and England, are tasked to basically get ready by March 2026 to sustain the arrival of mass casualties. You can make what you want of those things, but those are objective facts. And we have also some information that some individuals have received NATO clearance to participate potentially in the operations in Ukraine. Under what context? Would it be as advisors? Would it be as pilots of those mounted F-16 or Falcons? We don't know yet, but we even have some of the names and some of the documents pertaining to the security clearance. So we're keeping them right now somewhat on the down low. There's no need to exacerbate tensions, but yeah, this is actually verified. So the question is, when will France, through Macron, cross the Rubicon, essentially? But all the posturing, all the preparation are pointed to from the French intervention in Ukraine. And obviously, this would be a catastrophe, since the Russians have been pretty clear that any NATO-associated troops, whether they're in their official capacities or not, will be taken out, considered, fair game for the Russian armed forces. So, yes, it is somewhat, we don't want to sow panic, but this is obviously a situation which has to do also with the interior front for people like Macron or Starmer and Merz, who are each individually facing a catastrophic situation on the domestic front, and who have politically basically invested everything, every capital they had in this Ukraine project. So it would seem completely, suicidal for them to somehow, go along with whatever agreement might be reached between the Americans and the Russians, because let's make no mistake about it, those are the only politically relevant actor in this theater. Without doing anything they can to perpetuate the conflict, no matter what the cost and no matter what the price. So yes, this is where we are now.
And the French public will go along with this. I mean, as you point out, the Macron he has the popularity of head lice. And the same thing true with Starmer, same thing true with Merz. All of these people are
all lame ducks.
deeply unpopular. Yeah. So the French population will green like this, or does the French population that matter? Like, this is not a. I know you said that.
The French population has no say in it, because to the extent there's been somewhat retooled personnel deployed in Ukraine, some would say moonlighting as such, there's been absolutely no discussion at the National Assembly on the subject. So since there hasn't been any declaration of war against Russia, Macron is basically taking the line that there's no need to have any discussion since we're not at war with Russia. But, that's the problem, is that, when you are mission creeping like this, next thing you know, you put your finger into l'engrenage and you find yourself in a de facto conflict. And it's too late to backpedal. So that's the problem we find ourselves in here.
But if he's putting troops in Ukraine, how is he making an argument that they're not at war with Russia?
Yeah, but they will find a way to finesse the narrative in such a way that they present the whole endeavor as a peacekeeping operation or interposition forces or what have you. It's all about semantics these days, and those people are very cynical. The people, the likes of Starmer, Macron, and Merz, they're all from the same school of managerial young leader, U.S. American French Foundation types, and they are being trained, they are being groomed to operate by sheer audacity, blank lie, lying to the media. When they are caught, their hand into the cookie jar, the proverbial cookie jar, or the spoon and the line of cocaine, they'll tell you, staring you in the face, that it was a handkerchief. They were just basically, just talking, and nothing foul happened. And they will say this in such a way that you're stupid, because they are such professional liars, such a sociopath. Let's put it this way, that they actually get to convince themselves that what is isn't, and vice versa.
Those people are going to die. I hope Macron explain to the family members before they send them into Ukraine why they're dying, because all of them are going to die. As you point out, mass casualties. Yes. I mean, Putin gave a speech. I think this was, if I'm not mistaken, 2 days ago, where he made it clear. He says, look, if Ukraine or if Europe is looking to start a war, then this is not going to be the same war that we're fighting against Ukraine. In the war that we're fighting against Ukraine, we're being very precise in what we're trying to accomplish. This will not be a special military operation. This will be a war.
Yes.
I hope Europe gets that. I hope they get that.
Yeah, we can only hope they do.
Well,
but the fact is, no, I don't think he's bluffing. That's why he's trying to basically warn them, and he's been issuing warnings over and over again, so that we can't just say about him that he's a sneaky type of guy. He's basically announcing it as it is. What you see is what you get with Vladimir Putin. You might not like it, but it's pretty transparent. He's not someone who, dances around the issues. So, the warnings have been given, the red lines, as it were, have been drawn, but it seems that on the other side, they either don't take him seriously, or they think he's bluffing, or they are willing to basically risk, getting their respective countries into an open conflict with Russia. And this is where we are right now. Again, and you do well to mention it. When you take into account the Ukraine-Russia conflict, we're talking about two Slavic people, members of the same family, essentially, duking it out over some personal family issues. And so, yes, great care is being carried out to limit the casualties and to make sure that strategic objective gets accomplished without a bloodbath. If it comes down to the Western Europeans getting involved, it's a whole different ballgame. There's not going to be any precautions. Russia will do what Russia must, and so this is where we are right now. We have no power over the process. This is something, unfortunately, that we can only be looking at as powerless spectators, and this is pretty much where we find ourselves in. I mean, we can only look at all the crying and screaming and behaviors emanating from Brussels and Paris and London and Ottawa in thus far as trying to portray the U.S. Delegation and the visit and whatever might have been discussed, because we still don't know anything about what was discussed for obvious reasons. Is that the slightest mistake you make in keeping this confidential finds itself into the likes of Bloomberg, and next thing you know, this is cannon fodder for them. They're using it and trying to basically recharacterize it, repackage it in a way that basically undermines the entire process. So this is why everybody is staying mum, whether it's Ushakov, whether it's Witkoff, whether it's Kushner, whether it's even Trump now, because the reason why he sent his son-in-law and his business partner, even though they are not cabinet members, they never were confirmed by the Senate, is that he doesn't trust his own administration. It's as simple as that. So this is the state of affair right now, unfortunately, and we're walking on eggshells.
Well, Ushakov did make a few comments. I mean, he pointed out that, yeah, there may be elements of the deal that they're okay with. He noted that there was 27 points, not 28 points, which is interesting because everywhere else was reporting 28, meaning they apparently just completely got rid of one of the points. Like, this is not even on the table from here on out, right? But Ushakov made the point of saying, look, there are parts of this that we agree with, but there are parts of this that are effectively non-starters. I mean, what do you make of the negotiations? I mean, do you see this as a positive development, negative development, no movement at all? How do you view it?
Well, it's better than no movement at all, and it's better than for Trump having to rely on people who basically misinformed him from the get-go as to the real situation on the ground. So it would seem at least that Trump has realized that he's being served some Kool-Aid, which does not reflect what's really going on. And so in that sense, he seems to be of the opinion that if even tactically speaking, if the idea is to try to come up with something that resembles taking into account of Russia's security interest, and they might be able just yet to salvage whatever colonial project and whatever proxy they might have groomed to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia. Doesn't mean that this whole thing won't be rekindled in a few years down the road, but to the extent we can't be faulting people for wanting to put an end to the violence. I think on both sides in Moscow and Washington, the consensus, at least, is that it's time to really start cranking on trying to find a formula that's acceptable on both sides. and most importantly, which can be taken to their respective public opinion and sold, in a way that satisfies all the factions, which obviously even in Russia, Putin has to arbitrate among a lot of factions. But yeah, I think the Trump faction wants to enlarge, wants to probably move on to something else and do business. And also they need a major political win, because polls have been coming out and it looks as if the GOP will lose both houses of Congress next year.
Oh,
I mean, they managed to. It's going to be a bloodbath. Yeah. Yeah. So the guy is desperate. He needs the Russian to provide him with something, but the Russians are not stupid. They're like, hey, you started this whole thing, so, we'll look at your situation, but you sure have to look at ours and take a lot of things into account. So when you say, for instance, we're now down to 27 from 28, I think that might have something to do with this kind of wishy-washy legalese, language bearing on Ukraine, or what's left of it, potentially down the road, working its way into NATO. No. It's no NATO, man. It's an ironclad position.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of other issues. I mean, the 28-point plan put out there initially talked about 600,000 troops. That's humongous.
I'm sorry,
That's like,
it's 800,000 troops at one point.
No, that's what the Europeans came back with for the 19-point plan, 800,000. But initially it was 600,000, which is still wholly inadequate. I mean, it should be reduced down to 25,000, 50,000 at the most. We're talking about 3 times the amount of the Ukrainian forces massed on the eve of February 24, 2022. With those 600,000 figures. There's also the issue of the territories. Moscow obviously it would behoove Moscow to have Washington on its side to endorse at the international level the fact that the new regions are Russian territories now. So it's something that needs to be taken into account in international text and maps. So. But there's also first and foremost this issue about Zelensky. And we can see through the recent revelation bearing on corruption scandals that, again, a faction within the US administration has had enough. And so they don't want to seem as if they are like culpable or, behind any kind of outright move against Zelensky. It's a little tad more subtle than that. But obviously, they've got everything they need on all of those characters, and they're basically implementing the onion peeling strategy. They first got rid of Bindich, the wallet. Last week they got rid of the Cardinal Yermak, and now they're going after. I think there's been a post by a very famous Ukrainian journalist who had to flee for her life, needless to say, but she's got great sources. I think her name is Panchenko or something like this.
Yes, she's on Twitter.
Yeah,
she has a huge following on Twitter.
She operates from Dubai, I understand. I mean, so I'm being told. I don't know for sure. I wouldn't want to endanger, physical integrity. But she's saying that they've got the goods on no less than 70 members of the Servant of the People party. Wow. So they're squeezing right now. They're squeezing. They're increasingly, putting the pliers on the Zelensky gang. And I don't know. I mean, we get the feeling that it could take still a while, but at the same time, it could happen really quickly, like within a week, and no one will be surprised that suddenly we hear that Zelensky is on his way out of Ukraine and relocating to Tel Aviv. This has been said. So, with the idea that, because the Russians are not going to entertain any kind of discussion, I think, from my point of view, until and unless this Zelensky, illegitimate Zelensky issue is resolved, and this would require the Rada to hand over the executive power to the president of the parliament. as the Constitution mandates. That means lifting martial law also, and start talking about setting up some elections pretty quickly, because again, it's a predicate to anything else. They may be discussing in parallel, the other points of this filler put out there, because it's not really a plan; it's a filler. Some people refer to it as the Alaska format, the paradigm at least. So those things were discussed, and somehow there's a consensual approach on the fact that we could work with that, but it would take a lot of work, a lot of discussion, a lot of mechanism to put in place. Verification-wise, it's a very complicated Gordian knot, to be sure. So, and this is a situation that's gotten to fester for the last 20 years or so, pretty much. And you cannot just resolve it 24 hours, as someone, was fond of saying. It's just not going to work like that.
You pointed out something that I find to be super interesting. You said Putin has the arbitrage between various factions that are in Moscow. And I would imagine some of those factions are like, we should finish this militarily, not over the negotiating table. Meaning, we can't trust the United States in this process. We've done Minsk 1 and 2. We've done Istanbul agreements. And none of those things were, let's say, sufficient for us to get and accomplish the objectives that we wanted to accomplish. And so for the special military operation, we need to complete this on the ground, less over the table. Or am I getting this wrong?
No, you're not getting it wrong, but there are a lot of parameters one has to take into account. The first one is putting an end to the violence, the loss of life. That's a net negative for everyone involved, especially considering that you. It is. Yes.
Well, the reason why I say that is Europe doesn't care. The U.S. doesn't care. The only people who care is Russia and Ukraine, and the Ukrainian government doesn't seem to care all that much either.
I understand, but again, if we look at the midterm deadline, right? Assuming the GOP does lose both houses of Congress, if you don't get a deal, at least in a way that would allow Trump to campaign on it and try to salvage maybe one, maybe two houses of Congress at this point. If they lose the House, the entire Congress, who's going to ratify any kind of peace deal? That's to me the intermediate midterm, in its most premier interpretation, deadline here, preoccupation. So we saw what happened with the treaty, Versailles Treaty, in 1919. The Senate was a Republican Senate, and Woodrow Wilson was a Democrat, and owing to internal U.S. politics, they decided that no, they were not going to ratify it and to validate it as a result. So that basically deflated the whole peace process in a way that one could argue this laid the ground for what happened a mere 20 years later. So we have to keep that into account as well. Right now there's an opening because the current administration controls all the institutional levers. And so to the extent, there's a possibility to get an agreement which would then be validated, ratified, and that would be difficult and politically dangerous for the Democrats to try to undermine it, even if they were to, let's say in 2028, get back into position of, yes, exactly.
But see, I'm very skeptical that even with Donald Trump holding the House and the Senate, that they're going to ratify anything on this front. And I guess,
think this is what. Yeah, I would say the Russians are willing to. I mean, it's that, or it gets worse from that point on. I don't think there's much of an alternative. At least with Trump, they have someone who's willing to talk, and someone who's willing to turn the page and move on to other things.
So arbitrage between different groups. What do you mean? What are the groups that he has to kind of negotiate with in order to get some kind of deal in Russia, or for, let's say, for a deal to be accepted on the Russian side?
Well, something that's acceptable, in a sense of what the strategic goals were concerned. So demilitarizing, that means that some of those points that needs to be discussed is the size of the Ukrainian army, to be sure. And as far as denazification, make sure that all those groups, those neo-Nazi groups, are neutralized one way or another. The Americans are known to, play along and purging. We saw it in Syria when they were trying to preserve the Jordani scenario. They occasionally drowned out a few of his rivals within the Indian province. So it's nothing, out of the ordinary. We have to keep, an eye on the big picture here. And I think whether it's Putin or Trump, they're both somewhat linked, joined to the hip in trying to make sure a deal that's acceptable on both sides gets done. But again, you can't just rush things through. I mean, they're starting from quite some way back, and you need to, basically do it the proper way. There's not 1,000 ways to go about those things. It's a hard work, attention to detail, and make sure that along the way, all throughout the process, you don't get derailed by informant from within your own administrations, because then it could be back to square one, pretty much.
Are you optimistic? I'm curious because I'm curious about what they're saying in Russia about it in general. But let's start with you first. Are you optimistic in general?
Well, I'm always cautiously optimistic. We have to, we can't just do nothing and just allow things to get worse and worse and worse. Because in the end, it just becomes insolvable.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to pray for peace. We need to advocate for peace, but we need to advocate for a peace that again is
lasting,
solid ground and takes into account security concerns on both. I mean, at least on the Russian side, and a face saving with some kind of sugar, put into the recipe, i.e. joint venture in the Arctic, joint venture in the mineral business, in the vastness of Eastern Russia. This is something that can sweeten the deal and get the American on board. Not to mention the American business and corporations as well. And those are an important factor, take into account in validating, paving the way for implementation, validation, ratification. So, but it's a painstakingly slow process, again, because trust is not really high, because there's a lot of people in Russia who feel that, yes, we have to go all the way to Kiev and remove this regime. But again, it could be a case of overreaching. If you go there, you're not going to be there for a couple of weeks. You're going to be there to denazify, as it were. If you do it the MacArthur way in Japan, it took him 7 years. So for 7 years, you're going to have troops stationed in the western provinces of Ukraine. And so this is very tempting then for some deep state creatures to start activating the guerrilla. The occupation trope, you're occupying, and you're not in friendly areas in that sense. And this actually feeds into this RAND Corporation white paper, which is to basically extend and exhaust Russia at its borders and beyond, in its former near abroad. So it could be tempting, but you got to be really cautious about this, because once you're in, you're in. You can't just pull out, unless you lose credibility. So you got to find you got to be creative on this denazification aspect. The demilitarization can be, agreed on, and it's not really an issue. It's a very technical issue, but the denazification, it's somewhat of a wishy-washy deal here. It requires a generational cleansing. You got to remove the textbook. You need to probably re-amend the constitution, because now we know that Rada just passed a law yesterday which excludes Russian from being a protected language.
Yes,
so that gives you an idea of the size of the problem. Those people you need an exorcism, essentially, right?
Yeah, that's
it's not a simple issue. Yeah,
it's like they're losing on the battlefield. Their negotiations, and they're passing a law immediately after negotiations between Wolff and Putin. Yeah, that's a serious FU. Putin is in India right now, and one of the questions that was asked yesterday to Peskov, and I was fascinated by this. John Helmer brought this up, and I want to get your take on it. Well, before I even get to this, what are they saying in Russia about these negotiations? Like, it's one thing to hear from the American press, but what is the Russian, let's say, political economy, the journalists, the bloggers, the
Pundits,
people
pundit
on TV?
class. Yeah.
Yeah, what are they saying? I'm curious.
Are you talking about the Witkoff Putin discussions?
Well, just the discussions in general, like on this notion
Mm.
of peace. I mean, I saw some of the recent
Oh,
polling that said that they see the United States as the primary enemy, which they are right about. Like, God bless them. But how are they viewing this? Are they viewing this as a positive development? Are
well,
they
I would
viewing
say you get a pretty diverse range of opinions. You have some people who are like gun ho about the whole thing. Let's go in and just remove the regime and keep steam rolling. Which is
yeah,
basically by default this is what's going on right now. I mean, discussions are going on, but not unlike what we saw in Vietnam. Military operations are not
they're
being
continuing.
stopped. This whole ceasefire, trope is as was dead in the water from the get go. Why should they stop? And every single day that passes by improves their negotiating position. So there's no point about stopping, which puts the onus on the American to come up with creativity, in addressing Russian concerns, in earnest.
Yeah,
So let's see if the Americans, first of all, take really stock of the situation and whether or not they are serious and providing, and for their own sake, politically speaking, at home, at least in as far as this particular administration is concerned, the required effort to make sure they give themselves a chance during the midterm, because the American people is very, very hungry these days.
I know.
They
Do
were
you know how
sold
sad
a
that
bill of
sounds,
goods.
though? Do you realize how sad that sounds? Like, you have 1 million Ukrainians that are dead. You may have 100,000 Russians that are being killed, give or take, in regards to the war. Territories are being lost left and right. And your argument, and it's not just your argument, and I don't disagree with it, is the only leverage that is compelling the United States to act in this. It's not about the loss of life. It's not about the people being killed. It's not about the territory that's being lost. It's about the midterms. That's so
That's right.
sad. That is
Yeah,
so
I
deeply,
know.
deeply sad and disturbing. Look, you're
It's
never
it's
wrong.
a sobering thought, but it is the reality. Yes.
Yeah. So Putin is in India. He is meeting with Modi. In fact, he is, I think I'm on the same time zone as India right now. So they've either in the process of meeting or they've already met. Peskov was asked the question yesterday that Russia didn't really have a good answer for. And what they asked him was, if there's any kind of conflict between China and Russia, would Russia defer to China? Basically, would they lean on the side of China in order to go against the Indians? I'm fascinated by the question because it never occurred to me that China and Russia would even go to war, let alone asking a question about the potential for them to go to war and what Russia would do in that. With that question looming, is that really the tenor of the conversation between Modi and Putin, or is there something else that they're discussing that is taking more relevance?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I don't think there's any of these topics being discussed between the two leaders. Let's remind our listeners that there was a consensual approach reached back in Kazan last year, which bore on those border disputes between China and India. And the agreed upon position was that at no point would the two powers allow such an issue to call into question not only the comprehensive bilateral nature of the bilateral relation, but what they're trying to accomplish as founding members of BRICS.
Right.
So it's almost like a tempest in a teacup. And of course, Vladimir Putin is not going to entertain any questions along those lines because it's counterproductive and it's, I would say, completely off,
It's
outside
irrelevant.
of the subject. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
irrelevant. I mean,
So,
yeah,
well, I was
I
going to
guess the
ask, so
term
what
is
do you think this
irrelevant.
conversation is about then? Like, what is, obviously he's going to India for a reason.
Business, sales of equipment. Well, hearing about Russian airplanes being sold in huge quantity, but not only, probably something dealing also with finding ways to reinforce the bilateral relationship at all levels. This is the first time in many years that Vladimir Putin is coming to India.
Yes.
And so there's also the issue bearing on, and if we have to ask, a sensitive question that will be discussed among the two leaders, I think, is how will India withstand US pressure to divest from buying Russian oil? Since basically, this has been the Trump administration approach recently,
Right.
and they've been trying to put the pressure on India, conditioning, the lifting of tariffs, I think, on India's ability to, purchase oil elsewhere. But I think initially, at least, Modi was pretty clear that the Indian economy needs all the oil it can get. It's not even a pro-Russian or pro-Ukraine or pro-anything else issue. It's a pro-India issue. And so they're not going to allow themselves to be arm wrestled by some outside power, in a way that goes against their interests. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
So yes, this is, I think, probably one of the most, I wouldn't say sensitive, but somewhat, would I say, interesting issues that the two leaders will discuss.
Is the oil thing having an effect on Russia at all? I mean, I know oftentimes many of the alternative media is like, this is no effect. This doesn't matter. It's irrelevant to the process. But is it relevant to the process? I mean, if you have certain companies that are divesting from, let's say, Lukoil, there's another, what is Rosneft, I believe is the other one,
That's right.
where
Yeah.
they're either, let's say, deciding not to buy.
But they both of them combined account for, I think, 8% of the entire world output. So it's not really something, But at the same time, you have countries like Hungary, Bulgaria. They have a lot of assets actually in terms of refineries. And if they were to basically, be forced to sell their refineries, and they're not satisfied with the offer that they're being given, that could create major trouble in countries in Eastern Europe.
Yes.
So, and we're already seeing, and we saw like Orban rush to DC to try to get, an exemption or a waiver on buying Russian oil. So it's not as simple as people think it, because the world economy is so interlinked, and Russia is a major player. Don't forget also that Russia is a civil nuclear superpower through their Rosatom energy sector, energy state company, nuclear energy state company. They actually provide uranium to the United States. They have, I think, no less than 40, I think it's 30 or 40 ongoing projects right now in every areas, every country, on every continent. They control from A to Z the entire filiere. And they actually have such a formula that allows countries who are strapped for cash to sign a deal with the Russians, where the Russians finance themselves everything from the construction to the operation for 60 years and the cleaning out and the formation of their own personnel. It's like you get a car with a key inside, and the only thing is that during the exploitation phase, there's a 4% commission interest rate, on the loans that the Russians give you. So this creates not only economic avenues of, cooperation, but also for Russia, huge geopolitical levers as well, because that means that it's the long-term view of the Russian political culture. Through the civil nuclear diplomacy, you basically create a join at the hip relationship with all the countries concerned for, give or take, 10 years, about 100 years. So this is a game changer. And again, and the Americans, purchase uranium. You have to keep in mind that Rosatom is about the only major state-owned company who's not sanctioned and whose lead CEO is not sanctioned. He can travel anywhere he wants and bank anywhere, in any country in the West he needs to. So does the company. So that tells you how much, Rosatom is that kind of this elephant in the middle of the room because more and more countries are diversifying now. It's not just about oil; it's about civil, and that's the reason why actually, when MBS was in Washington, among the deals that were signed was the Americans' promise to provide Saudi Arabia with a nuclear reactor, a civilian nuclear reactor, because they understand, again, the stakes and the importance to make sure that you're not allowing all those countries to at some point turn their back on you and do business with the Russian in such a way that you're pretty much frozen out of the process.
Mhm. No, that makes sense. I get it. Your point is Russia has more than just oil. Like the nuclear power thing is also part of the energy.
France used to be in that position about, let's say, 50 years ago, in the early 70s. France was the go-to destination for civil nuclear reactors.
Yeah.
But Macron sold the turbines, which is the key component of the entire chain, to General Electric for a paltry sum. Bought it back for 3 times the price he sold it for, and it still requires GE's authorization when they sell the know-how, at least in countries that require diversification. They still need to ask GE permission to use those Arabelle turbines. So France has lost all its autonomy in terms of what this tool used to allow France to do. Now it's Russia who has it.
Do you think, and we can close on this, so Europe has decided that by 2027 they're going to stop using Russian oil.
I'm sorry.
Is this going to happen? Yeah, I like, it's, for one, it's amazing to me that they believe that the war is going to continue until 2027. This seems to be outlandish, but like that this is going to have some kind of effect on Russia when they are the speed of the events of the Russians seem to be accelerating significantly. But is this going to have any effect at all on?
No
let's say,
effect at all.
Yeah, basically zero.
No, I mean, when I hear this question, I think about Jim Jones. it's about the Jim Jones. I mean, it's a mass suicide, in the name of a guru. I don't know who the guru is, but I guess the guru on the altar is nothing for Russia, no matter what, even if it means doing seppuku, harakiri on ourselves. Those people are crazy. They're completely disconnected from reality.
The audience may not know who you're talking about. Just so the audience knows, that's the one who got
well,
all
it's the Bushido, the way of the warrior. So
Right.
if you want to preserve your honor and you in the light of difficult circumstances as a samurai, you dishonored yourself or you dishonored your master.
Yeah.
Then the only way for you to go out while maintaining your honor is to off yourself, and there's a particular way of doing it with a sword, right?
Sword
That's right.
out.
That's right. It's a very clinical. Yes.
Yeah. And Jim Jones is the one who got
that's all I have to say about this. And what's funny is the EU sent a delegation right now as we speak in the US, trying to cheerlead, I don't know what, because they don't know nothing about what's being discussed, so they have to fill the vacuum of their own irrelevance, political irrelevance, by cheerleading and posting like crazy on X. There's this Valérie Ayé, who was on top of the list put forward by Macron for the European election. So she's essentially heading his party, or the Renaissance movement, and that's the name of Macron's
party
outfit for the last round of elections in the EU. And she's there right now, and she's posing with Nancy Pelosi and posting photos and repeating same old tropes. You got Radowski, whatever his name, Sikorski, and Applebaum husband, the Polish foreign minister, and all the likes that those kind of the rabid Russophobes, just basically writing nonsense, trying to remain relevant, because it's like an irresistible force, about which they cannot do much, but to the extent they control the media and get access to studios, they have to they have to, walk the walk, even if it increasingly looks completely, disconnected from the room. They don't read the room very well, and people are, obviously catching up on it, and it's all getting so gawky and so vulgar and so, as far as Zelensky is concerned, because the guy can just, he can't help, keep visiting, European capitals, doing what he does best, which is to beg. And the guy is hated. I mean, it's just, those people just inspire just disgust, and they have no restraint in their
Arnaud, I have appreciated this
proclivities.
conversation, man. I really have. I always appreciate these conversations. Thank you for this. Arnaud Develay, he's an author, political analyst, international lawyer specializing in international criminal law. His latest book, Foreign Entanglements, Biden, Ukraine, and the Fracturing of America's Political Consensus. Thank you for this, man. You be safe, okay?
Thank you, Jamal.
You have a
Always
good
a
one. Be
pleasure.
safe. Absolutely. Shout out to Arnaud. I haven't talked to him in a while, so it's really good having a conversation with him. And yeah, he gives great political insight. I guess we'll see. I mean, I'm fascinated by this idea that Putin has to negotiate among a member of his own, let's say, elites or a member of his own team on this idea of, okay, is there a deal that we can accept from the Americans? What does that look like? No, we're not going to accept anything that is going to, let's say, provoke a war within a short period of time. So any deal that is effectively made is a deal that will last for generations, not for a couple of years. And then we reinitiate this particular, let's say, militaristic process. Again, I don't know what that looks like, I don't know what that looks like. Like you're stuck in this position where you're going to have to trust the Americans, which I don't know how you do. By the same token, I keep making the argument, Russia is chasing safety. And in the context of chasing safety, is there something that you can accept that will give you some objective guarantees? And I'm using the term objective and I mean it in literal sense, like meaning not I feel like this works, not amidst three, but something that I guess can be validated. And I guess any validation will probably take through military force. But I don't know. I don't know. I'm not necessarily the one fighting that war. I am not the one who is pushing back on US and European expansion. This will be a decision for the Russians. And look, Arnaud makes a really good point. It's like, when this war first started, I was asking the question, how do you get out? And by get out, what I mean is, how do you bring it to a close? How do you end this? Because the moment that you end it, anything that's left of Ukraine gets refilled with weapons, in which case you're back in the same situation. And so you would think, okay, well, you need a deal. You need some kind of agreement in order to get you out of it. Or you go to the border of Poland. Now, that has its own problems, as Arnaud pointed out. If you're going to the border of Poland and you're taking over Western Ukraine, you have a lot of people that hate your guts in Western Ukraine. And so what you end up with is decades of guerrilla war, of you trying to maintain control over this particular region. And this is the fulfillment of the Rand Corporation document, overextend Russia. Now, from my point of view, that's exactly what the Europeans want. And I know some people, there are some analysts who I think are fantastic analysts. I'm not going to name names. I'm going to pull a Mark Sleboda and not name names. But they seem to come to a conclusion that the Europeans are somehow befuddled, that they're confused about what's happening. And the Europeans are thinking, yeah, the Russians aren't doing as well as we think the Russians are doing. And I think that analysis is just wrong. It's one thing of what they say. What they say may be one thing. They say all sorts of weird stuff. But let's assume for the moment that I'm right. They know perfectly well that Ukraine is getting rolled at this point. Would it change their behavior? Meaning, if the Europeans knew as a flat fact, 3 a.m. between them and their God, that Ukraine is getting taken to the woodshed right now and the speed of the Russian advance is only increasing. Would it change their behavior? Would it change their policy? My answer is no. My answer is no. If the objective is how do we overextend Russia? Well, part of the way of doing that is effectively forcing Russia to take all of Ukraine. Would that effectuate their objective? Yes. Would it allow them to continue to say Russia's a threat, considering they're now on the Polish border? Yes, it would. So I don't buy this premise that, well, Europe is just in the dark. They just have beliefs that Russia is not doing as well as Russia is actually doing. Yeah, I don't buy that premise. I just don't buy the premise. I mean, even Western media at this point is pointing out the condition of the Ukrainian military. So it's not even like it's a mystery. Even if they're reading their own press, it gets across the condition of the Ukrainian military, the desertions, the budget deficit of what, like $50 billion, the political turmoil that's taken place. And yes, the fact that they've just lost Pokrovsk, Volchansk, and very soon Seversk, and very soon Kramatorsk will be the last defendable location in the region, which will be surrounded. So I don't necessarily have this belief that they are in the dark about what is taking place. I think they're perfectly aware of what's taking place. I just don't think they care. I don't think they care. If every last Ukrainian died, I don't think Europe would care. That is not their objective. You have a proxy that is effectively being taken to the woodshed. And you have Europeans who are now apparently, at least going by some of the reports, willing to throw their own people into a Russian wood chipper, which seems outlandish to me, but here we are. I think for the Europeans, their problem is existential in a weird way. Yes, I mean, from the Russian perspective, this war is existential, but from the Europeans, it's existential in somewhat of a different way. What is the value of an organization that we've invested hundreds of billions of dollars into over the last 50 years if it can be taken apart when it devotes all of its energies into defending or fighting in Ukraine? What does NATO mean if they lose in such a magnificent way after devoting this much energy and resources into this enterprise? Well, that's a question for them to answer, right? But it's very possible that their answer is to just keep plugging along, to not read the headwriting or the writing that's necessarily on the wall. They may not necessarily be able to, based on their own biases, based on their own idea of exceptionalism, which is, again, mind-blowing to me that they consider themselves exceptional at all, considering Europe is effectively less and less relevant every minute that passes by on a clock. But nevertheless, I would tell you, in chess games, when you don't want to accept the draw, you often lose. And I say that to say, when you don't necessarily have the productive energies in order to accomplish the objectives that you want to accomplish, failure on some level is inevitable. And that failure gets worse and worse as your, let's say, your reach continuously exceeds your grasp. So, but I suppose we will see. I am skeptical that they're going to come up with a deal, but we will see. Oh, good. My next guest, one of my favorites, is here, Professor Wolff. How you doing, man? You doing okay today?
Okay, sir. And how about you?
I am doing well. I am doing better that you are joining me. We're joined with Professor Richard Wolff. He's Professor of Economics Emeritus at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, a visiting professor in the graduate program in International Affairs of the New School University in New York City. He is founder of Democracy at Work, host of their nationally syndicated show, Economic Update. His latest book, The System is the Sickness, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. And it is available with his other book, Understanding Socialism and Understanding Marxism, at democracyatwork.info. Professor, thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Yours is I don't mind saying it, and I hope you can handle the compliment. But yours is a very important show, and I'm here because I want to be part of that.
Well, thank you for that. I do. I think I can bear the compliment. Thank you for that. You did a video recently that goes a bit beyond economics. And maybe it doesn't go beyond economics. You can correct me if I'm overstepping in regards to my take on this. But you're talking about effectively the United States effectively breaking its own policy and breaking law by murdering 80 fishermen or 80 people in boats off the coast of Venezuela. And what's wild about this is that the fact that the United States is trying to overthrow the Maduro government doesn't seem to be the big media headline. The fact that they've murdered 80 people in these boats, again, doesn't seem to be the thing that shocks media per se. What seems to be bothering them is the fact that they double tapped a boat, murdering people who were in those boats, who they had no idea who these people were, and that they take issue with the fact that the people were hanging off the side of the boats when they murdered the people in the boats. That seems mind-blowing to me. It's not the fact that they blew up a boat that they had no idea who was in the boat. It's the fact that they double tapped it and murdered the people after the boat was apparently already destroyed or already hit the very first time. And you're pointing out that a country that's willing to do this and willing to just flagrantly ignore law, is willing to also ignore domestic law. Why was that the tenor? Did they have an economic dimension associated with it? Or was it just the fact that it was so beyond the pale?
Well, I don't think it's an either or. I think first of all, your question is absolutely appropriate. I don't believe in the boundaries that American universities observe. I remember when I was a student in college, I would raise my hand in an economics class and ask a question, and then have the professor look at me, clearly able from his or her face, they didn't know the answer, tell me that I should take that question to some other professor in another department. Wait a minute. The human being, our brains don't have little lines or little gates. Think this, don't bring in that. That's not the way anybody ever learned anything. So it's not appropriate. I understand you can know some things better or more than you know other things, but it's more and less, it's not either or. And it's a kind of queer behavior, I find. So I think your question is absolutely right. For example, how you separate politics from economics strikes me as a stupid enterprise, since they're never separate. Every economic reality I've ever encountered is full of politics. And now to answer your question, everything that looks like a political act has economics wrapped in it. So let's do Venezuela. Number one, Venezuela represents no imminent political threat. You do not go to war and you do not murder people if you are not threatened. That's why we have a law which says the only time you can justify killing anybody is if you can show that it was defending yourself against being killed. And if you can't show that, you can't do that. When we discover that police have killed somebody and the bullet went into the back of that person, we know what happened here, and it was murder. It was not self-defense. The cop was not endangered. People hanging on to the edge of a boat in the water 1,000 miles away are not a threat to the United States. No way, shape, or form. Therefore, anything like what was done is a violation of American law, international law, every ethics that I've ever heard of, and every morality that I've ever encountered. And there is no excuse. And you're right. You're right to notice that it is, let me use the honest word, it is sick to focus on the two people hanging onto the edge of the boat who were killed when there's roughly 85 people who were sitting in a boat who were killed in the 3 or 4 months before that. Why is one a big deal and the other one isn't? Yeah. 2 people, 85 people, everybody dead. It seems to me the story should be, what are we doing? We know, because our government has told us, that the vast majority of legal and illegal drugs coming into the United States do not come from Venezuela. It's not a particularly important source of that. Other countries are, but not Venezuela. Number one. Number two, and this I like to stress to people, we have a drug problem in the United States. Unless you've been sleeping, you know that. Everybody knows it. I can get drugs. I live in New York City. I can get them wherever I want. I remember my son, when we were living in Connecticut, going to high school and letting me know there were drugs I didn't even hear of that he could get at any moment in the gym or outside the playground. And my daughter likewise. So we know, and we know that in the United States, people are being arrested for drug traffic all the time, one place or another. Here's what we do in America, because it's our law. We arrest those people if the cops can catch them. You arrest them, you confiscate drugs if they have them on them. You then give that person a lawyer, and you give that person the right to be presumed innocent unless and until proven otherwise. Then they go into a procedure with a jury and a judge. And after all of that, and they have a lawyer to defend them, if they are found guilty, they are given a prison sentence. But we don't kill these people. We never kill. Well, if we don't kill our own people who have gone through a procedure and been found guilty of what we call a crime, we don't kill them, and I'm in favor of not killing them. But then there is absolutely no justification for killing those people in the boats who were not shown their evidence against them, who were not given a lawyer, who had no jury, no judge. They had Donald Trump, executioner, who decided who and what they were, and through Mr. Hedge Theft, even though he's running away from responsibility in a soldierly way, gave the order to kill these people. By the way, this is going to come back to haunt us. There is now the wife, the widow of one of the people killed, who has begun a lawsuit, I believe in Venezuela, but it doesn't matter where, saying that her husband was killed illegitimately. And she's right. And my guess is she will eventually prevail, although that'll be in the future, and the same media you point to will ignore it. Now the economics. There is, of course, something going on about this effort to topple Mr. Maduro. Venezuela has oil. And there's a great irony. The countries whose great luck was to happen to be sitting on a piece of land under which was lots of oil, which could have and should have brought them all kinds of lucky benefits because it's there as opposed to 50 miles either way elsewhere. Instead, what could have and should have been a blessing has proven to be a curse. The United States wants access and control of that oil. That's it. The rest of Venezuela is absolutely of no interest at all. Don't need it, don't want it, can't control it. Venezuela is a very large country. We're not talking a little place. We're talking a very big place. Huge mountains, jungles. You think you're going to send the American military in there and they're going to be able just to... Look, we went into Vietnam and the United States was defeated. The enemy in Vietnam was the North Vietnamese Communist Party. You know who runs Vietnam today? The North Vietnamese Communist Party. They won, we lost. We're not there anymore. They run the show. That defines winner and loser. In Afghanistan, our enemy, our U.S., was the Taliban. You know who runs Afghanistan today? The Taliban. They won, we lost. Ukraine, we're in the process of losing again. Okay, all of these, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, these are among the poorest countries in the world. We are among the richest countries in the world with an enormous military apparatus. They won, we lost. Americans have a wonderful way of not seeing what they don't want to see. But I'm not into that. I think I learned it's better to see it, however troubling it is, than to pretend it isn't there. So we want control of that oil, largely because much of the rest of the world's oil is slipping out of our control. Let me give you 3 examples. 1, the largest source of oil in the world is the Middle East. And the biggest country producing oil is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, for those who don't know, recently joined the BRICS. The BRICS are an alliance of countries centered around the People's Republic of China. And that's where the oil is going to be going in the years ahead. You know why? Because China's economic and industrial development is more rapid than anywhere in the world, much more rapid than what we have in the United States, which has been true for the last 25 years. And they're the ones who need the oil. They're making their alliances to secure the oil. When they secure the oil, it puts us in a little bit of a problem. We have a lot of oil inside the United States, but number 2 oil producer after Saudi Arabia is Russia. And they're not going to be real eager to give it to the United States for all the obvious reasons. Number 3, Nigeria. And Nigeria is an independent country that is, let's put it this way, not so friendly to the United States for all kinds of reasons. And you notice Mr. Trump has recently made noises about Nigeria. There he can't talk about drugs because that's not an issue. I mean, it isn't in Venezuela, but he could try because people kind of know Latin America's got something to do with drugs, but not Nigeria. So in Nigeria, he had to come up with another story. And here's the story. Nigeria is a country that has a large Muslim population and a large Christian population, and they clash sometimes. So now he's going to talk about, going in there and protecting the Christians and all of that stuff. But this is make-believe. This is designed so the media can talk about aggressive American activity in the world. According to the United Nations and everything I know, one country is not supposed to interfere in the activities of another. Last week, while the country was focused on the murdering by Americans of those folks in boats around Venezuela, the President of the United States pardoned the former president of Honduras, if I remember the story correctly, who had been convicted of drug trafficking in the United States, bringing millions and millions of dollars of cocaine. That guy was arrested. That guy had very good lawyers. He had a jury. He had a judge, but he was found guilty and given a prison sentence. 2 weeks after he began his sentence, Mr. Trump freed him. This is the man who wants us to believe that he's murdering people in boats because he's so concerned about the drug traffic, and he just gave a free pass to a proven, convicted guy who had all the legal protections that were not given to the people in those boats. It is so outrageous, Jamal, that, it really, even for me, and I'm used to seeing this stuff, this is gross. This is really gross stuff. It doesn't stop at murder. It doesn't stop at the hypocrisy of letting the other guy go. I mean, what are you doing? And the answer is you've got people here in power, and they're willing to do anything.
Yeah.
Watch them now. Watch as Trump and Hegseth are trying to hang it all on some obscure admiral, hoping he takes the fall. I mean, it's so transparent. Everybody who isn't, lost in MAGA land can see what's going on here. And you're the last thing you said, I want to just underscore my agreement. People who use power the way Trump and his associates are doing don't stop at a national border. If they're going to do it in Venezuela, and if they're pulling another stunt in Nigeria, think about what they're probably doing in Ukraine. Think about what they're probably doing here in the United States, because they will have the same behavior at home that they show abroad. So if you're feeling safe, it can't happen here. It's already happening here.
Yeah. What do you make of it? This seems like a country that's spiraling, to be honest. I mean, to go this far in regards to just breaching U.S. law.
Yeah.
And right now, I guess they sent Wickoff and Jared Kushner, I don't know why Jared Kushner is there, but okay, Jared Kushner, to Ukraine in order to make some kind of deal. The Europeans have gotten together completely against any notion of a deal, even though the deal was a dead letter when it came up with the 28 points. But whatever. The Europeans have effectively gotten together and are doing any and everything in their power to steal the Russian money, because they want to fill budget shortfalls, and they also want to proceed and keep the war going. What is going on with Europe? I know you have ties to various countries in Europe, and so I'm very curious on your take of what has happened to Europe, what is in their minds that gives them this impression that, we can keep this war going for X number of years more.
Okay, I'm glad you asked. I should explain. My father was French. My mother was German. My father was born in France. My mother was born in Germany. French and German have been languages I've spoken since I've been a child. I was born in Ohio. I'm an American. I've lived and worked in the United States all my life. But I have, connections to Europe, as you put it, because I'm interested. I can read, the language and all of that. I can't overstate the tragedy and almost the historical profoundness of what's happening in Europe and to Europe. And it's going to affect the whole world. And so here in a thumbnail sketch is what's going on. For most of the last 500 years, Europe thought of itself as the center of the world. It's where the Renaissance happens. It's where Christianity splits into Catholic and Protestant. It's where capitalism arises for the first time. It's where the whole world is brought under the control of a very small number of European countries. The British Empire, the French Empire, for a while the German Empire, and so on. Up until recently, they could think of themselves as the center of the world. Everybody had to learn French, or everybody in the world had to learn English. Oh, wait, the dollar is the world currency. Before that, the British pound was the world currency, and so on. All of that is now over. The world economy is now focused on two powerful centers. One is declining. That's the United States, whose empire over the last century developed, grew very, very powerful, but is now declining. That's why we lose these wars. That's why we're ripping ourselves apart right now. That's why we have a government so desperate that it behaves in the way we've just talked about. Meanwhile, there's another new emerging powerhouse center of the world economy, China and its allies. Where does that leave Europe? Answer, nowhere. Europe is in between. You want to know where cutting edge technology comes from in the world today? It either comes from the United States, Silicon Valley out there in California and all of that, or it comes from China. You want to know who's making electric cars effectively in the world today? China. You know who's developing green energy, solar powered? China. I could go on, but you're getting the picture. Where is Europe? Nowhere. Tell me a single major breakthrough in modern technology that comes from a European country. You can't find it. The European countries are disasters right now. Let me give you example 3. Mr. Starmer in England, popularity 10%. Mr. Macron in France, popularity less than 10%. Mr. Merz in Germany hasn't even been in power for a year, rushing headlong into the toilet. You've got to understand, Mr. Trump is much more popular in the United States, and he's going down than they are. So here's the problem. They unified Europe under the European Union at the turn of the century, from the 20th into our current century. They were supposed to unify so they could be a powerhouse in the world the way the big US was and the way the big China already emerging was. But after 25 years, the United States is tilting down and the Chinese are taking off. The Europeans decline. And one of the reasons is their leadership, Starmer, Macron, Merz, or any of the others. They were unable to overcome the divisions. They were unable to realize the potential of a union. You put all of Europe together, it's bigger than the United States. It's richer than the United States. But that never mattered because they couldn't get themselves together. The Germans didn't trust the French. Neither of them trusted the English. And all of them for good historical reasons. So there's nothing left. And what has to happen now is they have to face the last horrible indignity that makes them look stupid. And I don't ever use that word, but they look stupid to their own people. They made a deal in this war. Russia invades Ukraine. Whatever you think of that particular war, and believe me, it has its good guys and bad guys spread on both sides. But whatever you think, what the Europeans did was declare this is a horrible act by Russia. Really? I'm not sure if you're aware or if your listeners are. There's an annual measurement of corruption in every European country. And they list how well you're doing or not doing. Right? The most corrupt country in Europe for decades has been Ukraine. It is a place where everything and everyone is for sale. That's not a good sign. Russia invades Ukraine. The Europeans decide Ukraine is a cradle of liberty, really, and a cradle of freedom. Oh, boy. And we're going to support them against the evil Russians, led by the super evil Mr. Putin. Wow. Okay, how are you going to defeat Mr. Putin? Because he has an advantage. His country is very large, and your countries are not. Well, we're all going to get together and we're going to sanction him. We're going to bring him to his knees. I'm quoting you now, what leaders, you and I know that early in the year 2022, when that war started, Mr. Biden, our president, will bring Russia to its knees. The ruble will collapse. None of that ever happened. None of it. Why? Because Russia is a big, powerful country. But there's a second reason. Standing right behind Russia, supporting it every inch of the way, is the People's Republic of China. And that's where the wealth and the power comes from. The Europeans didn't know what to do. They couldn't win anything. So they decided the great punishment, and you're going to love this, the great punishment is to say to the Russians, we're not going to buy your oil and gas. In the Russian economy, that's very important. Russia is one of the places, as I mentioned before, where oil and gas exist in incredible quantities, sort of like the United States in that way. And they sell a lot of it to Europe, particularly to Germany. And they sell it at incredibly low prices. Germany became an industrial powerhouse over the last 40 years for one overwhelming reason. They got the cheapest energy anyone trying to develop industry anywhere in the world was able to get. Russian oil and gas coming through pipelines until they blew one up, coming through cheap as hell. Okay, they decided we won't buy your oil and gas. That'll bring you to your knees. Mr. Putin took an airline trip, one to Beijing and one to New Delhi. In Beijing, he asked Xi Jinping, would you please buy the oil I can't sell to the Europeans anymore? Sure. Then he went to Mr. Modi in New Delhi and he said, would you please buy the oil? Sure. They were eager to get cheap oil and gas for their industrialization. So this big plan of Europe went nowhere. But what it did do is make all European businesses have to pay 3 times the price for their energy that they used to be able to get Russian energy for. Above all, from the United States, we sell them our liquefied natural gas as a substitute. And the Europeans destroyed. Their economy wrecked. Why? They can't compete. They have to pay more for energy than any of their competitors in the United States or Japan or anywhere else. So they're falling apart. The leaders there are revealed to have made the worst mistakes leaders can. They're desperate. And the only way they see forward is to endanger the peace of the world by beating the war drums against Russia, making Russia terrible, making Mr. Putin another Stalin or so, just on and on, a kind of hysterical anti-Russian cuckoo, which is simply a way for them to cover their rear end. They want people to think about the dangers of Russia rather than the failures of the politicians of Europe who have led their people into a total economic dead end. We're living through all of that. And then when Mr. Trump, who told them to do all these things, says, oh, and by the way, I'm going to hit you with a tariff. I don't care what happens to you. Then it's been led down the garden path by a guy who, when they get to the bottom of the path, kicks them in the rear end. No, they're nowhere. And if you think Mr. Trump is desperate, and he is, as the American empire declines, he can always look at the Europeans and he can see people more desperate than he is.
One last question that I want to hit you with before I let you go. The deficit. So I guess this goes into the economies of dying empires also. I mean, Europe, several empires apparently are economically dead, if not dying. Yeah. But we are $7 trillion in debt, give or take $1 trillion. When the quote big beautiful bill comes to fruition after the midterms, that number is going to skyrocket. Effectively, we're taking money from the poor and giving it to the rich.
Yep.
With that particular bill. What is the effect of that on the country as a whole and individuals as a whole? And individuals as a whole sounds weird, but on people themselves in the country itself, how do we manage that? I mean, we're talking about something that's going to go 40 trillion, 50 trillion without any inability to ever pay that money back.
That's right. Well, there are several things to understand about it. First of all, the very existence of a deficit and the accumulating national debt is a sign that the political system is unable or unwilling to raise taxes. You don't have to borrow money if the government has raised taxes. Taxes is what the government is supposed to do. Tax businesses, tax individuals, use that money to perform the activities we want the government to do, to run the harbors and defend us and run our schools and all the things that we need done collectively or as a community. If the United States government were willing to tax corporations and the rich, then they would raise the money to pay for the things they do. They wouldn't have to borrow anything. So no one should think of the deficit as some kind of event that drops out of the sky like, rain or snow. That's not what this is. This is a political decision. So let me answer the question. Why isn't the government taxing corporations and the rich? And the answer is corporations and the rich have in their hands the profit this country generates. And they use that money in part to buy the politicians who will then not tax them. That's smart for them to do. That they've understood that. If you're the people who get the profits, if you're the rich, and you're in a sea of people who aren't rich, you're vulnerable. You better take steps to prevent those who are not rich from looking at you and saying, wait a minute, they should be taxed according to their ability to pay, which is part of the American system. But they've bought politicians who do not tax them. Well, then how is the government going to function? Answer, it borrows. It borrows the money it needs to do. And now if you understand what I'm about to tell you, you will understand the American capitalism. Where does the government of the United States go to borrow the money that it's not taxing from corporations and the rich? And the answer, you're going to love it, is corporations and the rich. It goes to them and it says, would you please lend us the money? And the corporations and the rich, giggling to themselves, say, sure, you've been so nice to not tax us. We'll take the money you could have taxed away from us, and instead we'll lend it to you, because that way you have to give it back to us, plus pay us interest while we wait. Now, for corporations and the rich, this is a no-brainer. Of course, they prefer the government to borrow the money from them rather than to tax it away. But for the rest of us, you, me, the mass of people, this is not good. And I'm going to tell you why. We have 38 trillion is the number right now of a national debt. When the government borrows, it has to pay interest. Well, where is the government going to get the money to pay interest to $38 trillion worth of debt? The answer is you and me. The taxes we pay right now, a sizable portion of the income tax you pay every April, of the tax you pay on the motor fuel, on cigarettes, on alcohol, all the things that the government uses to tax, a huge portion of that doesn't go for any service to the people. It goes to pay interest on the national debt, which means we are paying interest that finds its way into the hands of the corporations and the rich who lent the money to the United States government. Last step. Foreign countries also lend to the U.S. government. The two biggest single lenders to the United States government are Japan and China. All right, China owes $750 billion, roughly, of U.S. debt. That means that the United States government collects taxes from you and me and everybody else and takes a portion of them and pays the interest to the People's Republic of China. Tens of billions of dollars a year of our taxes go to them, which they can use to do what? Develop the Red Army of China, among other things. Yes, you have to enjoy the irony of, and why is this crazy shit happening, if you pardon my Spanish? Why? It's happening because American politicians don't want to tax corporations and the rich, because they know that if they do, those corporations and those rich people will give their money to the opponent of this politician at the next election, and they'll be ancient history. We are trapped in a capitalist system here that is destroying us. And the real question, I'll leave you with this, are we going to let the decline of this system take us all down with it? That's the big question.
Professor Richard Wolff, you have my deepest appreciation. Always enjoyed these conversations. Professor Wolff, he is professor of economics emeritus, University of Massachusetts Amherst, and a visiting professor at the graduate program in international affairs of New School University in New York City. He's founder of Democracy at Work and host of their nationally syndicated show, Economics Update. His latest books, When the System is the Sickness, The System is the Sickness, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. And it is available with his other books, Understanding Socialism, Understanding Marxism, at democracyatwork.info. Professor, you have my deepest appreciation. Always appreciate you joining me. Thank you for this.
Same here, and I look forward to talking with you again soon.
Have a good one. Be safe. All right. Shout out to Professor Wolff. Always appreciate that conversation. Yeah, man, a dying empire. And the things that a dying empire does when it doesn't seem to have solutions for the fact that it is a dying empire. Peter Turing's book is so good on this one. Because it gets across this thing of how systems get into situations where it loses the capability of making reforms in order to change the system, in which case it effectively goes up to the point where it can no longer go and it crashes. And do we see any politician coming back saying, you know what, we're going to raise taxes because we need to pay down the debt? I don't. And it goes beyond the debt thing. It goes to energy production, the inability to, build bridges, railroads, this inability to ensure infrastructure is intact. It's like it's a list of things. It's not just one thing or the other. And I don't see a political solution for it. So, yeah, we have come to the end. Let's go to chat. We have a few chats. And look, like the video, share the content. If you find yourself coming back to the show often, you can always support this content through PayPal, Patreon, Super Chat, Super Stickers, Buy Me a Coffee. All of these things effectively help the show continue. YouTube is a fickle mistress because of the conversations and the topics that we hit. There's a tendency for them to demonetize the videos. When they do that, it's kind of up for grabs. And so your support allows the show to keep ticking along. And I thank you for doing so. We have, let's see, Laugh 66. Arnaud, we all want peace. It's never going to happen with Trump. He thinks Nazis are fine. The sad part about the conversation with Arnaud, it's not, hey, we need to end the war to stop people from dying. We need to end the war to stop territory from being taken. We need to end the war in order to prevent a larger war in Europe. It's, well, Trump needs to end the war because he's going to look bad in the midterms. Oh, that is that is so raw and unfortunate. But look, the truth of the matter that people need to kind of accept, the Europeans, the Americans don't care about Ukrainians dying. They don't care. 1,000%. They don't care. The lives of the Ukrainians that are effectively being dragged from their houses and thrown onto the battlefields, very poorly trained and everything else, matters not at all. Meaning their lives are irrelevant to U.S. policymakers, or for that matter, European policymakers, as they think about this war. It doesn't matter. That may be difficult for people to understand. That may be difficult for people to kind of accept because your own personal biases has a bias for life built into it. Theirs don't. They're sociopaths. And that has to be accepted flesh to bone if you're going to understand what's taking place. We also have Tarharka. Europe will not allow Russia and Ukraine to have peace. They will do their best. They will do their best. Again, whether that's expanding Russia to try to overextend them, where they take over West Ukraine and have to deal with like guerrilla wars, or whether that's those fools starting a third world war, they would do their best. Russia winning for them it's so mind-blowing. It hits at the heart of this idea of their own exceptionalism. Oh, we're too good. We're too virtuous to allow Russia to win this war. What does it mean for European exceptionalism or American exceptionalism when Russia puts his boot into the ass of their proxy and does so in a stunning victory, meaning does so in a victory that is unmistakable? Well, obviously it shows that you're not exceptional as you thought you were. And that seems to be too much of a hurdle for the Europeans to accept. So yeah, they will do their best. Agreed, Taharka. They will do their best. All right. We have come to the end. I want to thank all of my guests, Professor Richard Wolff, Arnaud Develay, Vanessa Beeley. I want to thank all of them. Vanessa sent me a text saying they are bombing in southern Lebanon as we speak, meaning as soon as she got off, they were effectively bombing in southern Lebanon. She lives in Lebanon along with Marka Laith. Yeah, I just hope they're safe. All right. I would like to say you guys be safe. As I always tell you, be kind to the degree that you can be kind. And I will see you bright and early tomorrow morning. Have a good one all. Thank you.